Hi, my name is Pedro Silva, and I'm a docent at the Bias exhibit brought to you by the Smithsonian and hosted at Boulder's JCC, Jewish Community Center. And I just want to take a moment to introduce this exhibit to you and let you know why you should come while it's here until March 23rd. Let's take a look inside. So on your first visit to the Bias exhibit, one of the other docents or myself will start you off here with a definition for bias. So this is the definition that we use for bias, which is a preference or prejudice either for or against another thing, person, or group. Now, it's important to understand the definition that we're using when we go through the exhibit, because honestly, people have a bias about what they think bias means. Normally, when we think about bias, we think about the word prejudice more than likely, or something like prejudice, and we think that bias automatically means bad person. And so our brains start to shut down because we don't want to be seen as bad people. So as soon as we hear the word bias, we start shutting down. And that's why it's important to understand that it's a preference or a prejudice. What I like to say to people when I'm introducing them to the exhibit is that, let's say you go for a massage and somebody's just massaging you a little too hard and you don't like it. You have a preference for it. You're biased towards a lighter touch. On the contrary side, there's somebody else who might, like myself, who might say, can you rub a little harder? That's my bias. That's my preference. And they fall into the same category. But what's important to understand is that these biases are automatic. And so when they're automatic, they happen instantly, sometimes before they even come to our conscious awareness. And what this exhibit is helping us do is bring these biases to our conscious awareness so that we can actually do something about them, so that we're not controlled by them, so that we can be in wonder about them. I had the opportunity to open up this exhibit, and the question I asked folks was, what if the opposite of bias isn't neutrality like we used to think, but what if it's simply wonder? So once you get in here, we're going to start you off with the science of bias. And the reason why it's important to understand the science of bias is because you need to understand that it happens to all of us all the time. We are living and swimming in a sea of bias. And so the science of bias helps us understand how bias is actually functioning within our own mental landscape. And once we start to pay attention to that and understand that it's something that is just part of being human, we can begin to leverage that awareness to move from the particular to the relational to the systemic, which is the way that this exhibit flows. So it starts off helping you understand what's going on inside of you, and then how does that impact the relationships that we create or don't create, and then how is that perpetuated by the advertising that we put out into the world, the governance that we have, and so many other things. And once we understand that, then we can do something about it. And as we make our way around, and the way this exhibit flows is from left to right. So as you weave your way through taking in all the information, it could take you up to about 45 minutes if you take in everything. And you get to the end, you get to a place of reflection. And that's where we want you to end up. We want you to end up at a place of reflection. And so we're going to start off. I'm going to show you a couple things because I want you to actually come to the exhibit. But here's one thing I want to show you. So here is an image, and it says that we can't always trust our brains. And so I don't know how well you can see this, but I'm assuming if you're paying attention, it looks like these two tabletops are different sizes. And your brain would tell you that because of depth of field and perspective, etc. But there's this little red square that shows you, or this whatever it's called, quadrilateral. We spin it around and we find that the tabletops are actually the same size. Even though it looks like it's a completely different size, it's the same size. Flip it again. I've had many people walk through this and say, let me see that again. Is there a trick? No, there's not a trick. It's just that our brains are getting tricked. And our brains get tricked every single day. So if we can look at something with our eyes and think we figure it out, like this quadrilateral tabletop, and then we find out that it's not what we think, how many other things in our lives are not what we think? How many people are not the ways that we think they are? And so this science of bias helps us to understand that there's more going on than meets the eye. Now, throughout this exhibit, you're going to have a lot of different interactive displays and audio and other activities that you can participate in that will help you get a sense of how bias is working, and it will break it down for you. And one of the first stations is this Test Your Brain station, where there's 3 videos that will give you some ideas of how illusions work, how we judge people by their faces and see things that actually aren't even there, and other things like the Stroop effect, which I had never heard about until I came to this exhibit. And then from there, we move into how bias functions in our brain. So let's go check that out. Now, because I actually want you to come to this exhibit, this is going to be the last thing that I'm going to show you by way of introduction. And it's my favorite part to talk to people about. It's about the brain. And so here we see an image of our brain, and it's broken down in the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. And I'm going to give you a brief introduction to how this works. And if you come in and I happen to be here, or one of the other docents happens to be here, we can walk you through this. But there are things that you can read to break it down. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction. So the amygdala here. Let's just say that the amygdala is biased to keep you alive. Most of us have a preference to stay alive, and the amygdala helps that happen by telling you what to be afraid of. It's where the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn functions of our brain get stored. And so let's say, for example, you're afraid of snakes. And so you say, hey, snake's bad, bite me, I die. That's all you need to know. So your brain just kind of goes there. Well, that happens with a lot of different things in our lives that we've been told will unalive us. So we have all that information stored here. And while it's good to keep us alive, the problem with this is it has a bias which tells itself, if I'm alive, I must have been doing something right. And that might be great if you're enjoying your life, but if your whole life is full of fear and anxiety and all these other things, and the only proof that you're right is that you're still alive, well, I can tell you right now, there's a whole lot of people alive and they haven't done everything right. So sometimes you can't trust this part of your brain. Fortunately, we have this hippocampus, which is almost like a filing system, and it can tell the difference between one thing and another thing. This is where you store all of your different experiences and your exposure and all these other things. So now let's say you're walking into your garage, you bump into something, something moves, you get nervous, you think you see a snake, you go through all the feelings that your amygdala tells you should feel if you see a snake, but it turns out it's not a snake. It's actually a water hose. And now your brain is able to go, hold on. This is what a snake is. This is what a water hose is. I don't need to feel afraid. And this is where your prefrontal cortex kicks in. This is able to question everything you think you know and help you be able to say, okay, hold on. I know the difference between a snake and a water hose. Do I really need to feel this right now? Do I really need to still have my heart beating this fast, breathing this way? Or can I relax and laugh at myself? Now, it takes almost no time for this to develop, because before you get out of the womb, this is developed. By the time this is developed, you're like 27 years old. So you got a whole lot of time with an undeveloped prefrontal cortex making a whole lot of decisions. Now, does this mean don't trust yourself or young people can't think? No, it doesn't mean that. I know a lot of people who are way older than my 7-year-old who I would say maybe this ain't working right. But what I want to say is that because we can change, because biases can be replaced, because we can make different preferences throughout our lives, this is all good news. Because through exposure and experience and relationships and all sorts of things, you can actually challenge what this is telling you, be able to tell the difference, and then be able to make applications through how you change in your relationships, how you change things in systems. All those things are possible, but they're not possible if you can't admit that you're biased. And here's the fact: we all are. I am, you are, we are, but we can change those biases if we are aware of them. So last thing I'll say, funny story. My name is Pedro Silva. You know that. Well, that name comes with biases. I don't know how many times people have heard my name before they saw me, and then I can be in the room and then no one will find me, will come and look for me. If I come to an appointment or something, I'll come up and say, hey, I've been waiting around for a long time, and they'll say, I don't see you on the list. And I'll say, you don't see Pedro Silva on the list? And then they're like, oh my God, you don't look like a Pedro Silva? Bias. I do look like a Pedro Silva because I am a Pedro Silva. This happens all the time. And that's just a little thing. There's so many more stories that I could tell you, that other people can tell you, that we all know and we've experienced, and some of them that we caused. But we can change all of this and increase our relational capacity and our imaginative capacity, our prefrontal cortex's capacity, just by being aware. And so this is an invitation. Come out to the bias exhibit at the JCC. It's only here for a little less than 2 weeks. So if you don't have a tour, do your best to get out here. Start the conversations. There's a lot of conversations happening in our community right now, that if we could tie those things together, we could actually be very, very intentional about the communities that we're creating and how we're serving one another. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you here.